Hi, it's Rich Bunn. I've been trying to get published for about 10 years, and recently I wrote the first 10 chapters of an audiobook and I put them on YouTube for you guys to kind of critique and tell me what you thought. And you did that, and it was absolutely brilliant. And I had loads and loads of really helpful comments. And what I've realized is I'm probably never going to get published, because the kind of book I want to write is the kind of book I want to read, and that kind of book is out of fashion. I think it's a comedy that's a little bit Monty Python, a little bit Terry Pratchett. So this is the second draft of that audiobook, and it's very, very different to the first draft. So if you listen to the first draft, I would appreciate you listening to this one, or if you haven't listened at all, I'd really appreciate your thoughts. Hopefully you enjoy it. Ultimately, this time around, I'm not looking to get published. I'm just looking to write something that I love writing and that hopefully you'll love listening to. Thanks very much.
Zanzibar Barracks by Rich Bunn. Prologue. Amidst the disturbing and eternal gurgles of the ancient lavatories, Colonel Randolph Jeffrey realized how hopelessly drunk he was. Damn his own ego. He'd been having too good of a time, drank too much, too fast. Too many chaps and chapesses having their career moment with the boss. Too many ports, any port in a storm. Or claret or brandy. Too much fizzy lager, his stomach now making noises that rivaled Armitage and his pal Shanks, croaking like storm drains amid the porcelain splendour of the officers' mess bogs. Above him, he had become aware of the noise, which suddenly seemed nauseating and oppressive. He clung to the sink and watched the person in the mirror blur in and out of focus infuriatingly. Getting home, that was the key now. He needed to escape the mess ASAP. But such an event had to be styled out. He must go upstairs, say something witty to the young subalterns like, "Well, I think I'd better leave so that I don't see what you young bucks are getting up to," or something. Buy a round of drinks and have the duty bunk send someone to drive him back. Randolph administered himself 2 hard slaps, one to each bony cheek. A percussive adjustment, as he'd once heard it described by an infantry sergeant. The sting brought him back to a state close enough to sobriety, as with a grim nod he began to stagger back upstairs, his jaw redolent of concentration. Zanzibar officers' mess had a lovely old staircase. Its floorboards were wood from a ship sunk during the Spanish Armada, if you believe the stories. Randolph was certainly feeling seasick enough. His arm caressed its polished banister, and only slowly became conscious of his phone, bumping his wrist as it vibrated silently in his pocket. "Hello?"
"Hello, is that the Colonel Jeffrey?"
"Randolph, yes." Terrible time for a call. He tried to focus.
"Colonel, my name Maria. I call from the Four Oaks."
The hotel?"
"The nursing home, sir? I am very sorry to say Mr. Brock, he just passed away."
"What?"
"I am very sorry, sir. Mr. Brock, he was your father, yes, I am so sorry."
Randolph gripped the balustrade now more like a drowning man. His knuckles whitened as his head spun. "I'm sorry, are you telling me my father is dead? He was sick, was he? What happened?" The voice on the other end of the line was apologetic, soft, not British. Randolph struggled to decipher what it was saying, like a bad line on a military radio.
"He was just old. His heart, he stopped. He went to sleep on his heart. It happens, Colonel. He was very peaceful."
"I have to go." Covering his mouth with his hand to prevent the vomit coming out, Randolph lurched desperately out of a fire exit and towards the car park. It had started to rain. He found his Mercedes, his clicker, his emergency Marlboro lights in the glove box. He had to start the engine to get the cigarette lighter going and then, hands trembling, managed to get one lit and into his mouth. Dr. Brock Jeffrey had hated his son. No, that wasn't true. Hate requires emotion. His father had both disapproved of and been largely uninterested in him. Ironically, most of Randolph's worst habits had probably begun as attempts to gain his attention. Brock had been a teetotaler, a pacifist, and the world's leading authority on Melis melis, the European badger. Randolph was a hard-drinking, although less so these days, career army officer who thought naturalism was something exciting done on European beaches. He had certainly never managed to excite his father, at least not 1/10 as much as he had seen in him whilst reading an academic paper on the increase in British earthworm populations. And now he never would, because he was dead. It was an indeterminate amount of time later that Randolph realised he was driving his car. The rain was now coming down in swirling sheets, making halos of the distant lights of the mess. Randolph's long fingers curled around his steering wheel as he realised he'd been drunk and distraught enough to give over to total autopilot. Should he pull over? No. He was still inside the barracks. What if someone found him asleep in his vehicle? He'd be a laughingstock. He was going absurdly slowly, perhaps about 10 miles an hour. The CO's house was on camp, an old tradition. Consequently, despite the rain, the alcohol, and the darkness, the risks were minuscule. He wasn't on a public highway. He knew the route blindfold and paralytic. Even at this speed, he'd be home in less than 5 minutes. It was a weeknight at 3 a.m. His soldiers were asleep. Randolph increased his speed. He would tell the chaps that Hermione, his wife, had picked him up. She didn't even have to know. He couldn't believe his father was dead. Well, he would be home in a few minutes, and at least there would be no embarrassing... The noise was a kind of heavy crunch. But worse, far worse, was the feeling of the car lifting from the ground. Not merely a jolt, but a jarring lurch as 750 kilograms of metal and rubber were lifted bodily from the earth. The second noise was a scream, cut off, finishing in the bubbling gurgle of blood in the lungs. His car had been forced off the road by a collision. Randolph cut the ignition and wrenched the door open, shoes and hems sinking into soft, wet mud as he confronted an unmoving body. The sound of the rain, the sight of the body. Rain. Corpse. It's 3:45 a.m. now, and Randolph is wet, wetter than he had ever been. Randolph is soaked, drenched inside and out, drunk and ashen and retching uncontrollably as he drags a body into the woods, sobbing as he hadn't done since he was a child. But unknown to him, someone else is in these woods, watching. Chapter 1. Lance Corporal Ryan Taylor was psyching himself up to make a deal with the devil. Ryan had milk-bottle-thick glasses, double cream skin, a forehead like a slab of vanilla ice cream, and the absolute minimum muscle mass required to operate a human. He looked like someone had seen an army recruiting poster, and then, just for a laugh, decided to draw someone who was the polar opposite of everyone on them. Recently promoted, his new job was as the camp map reading instructor. The role had come with responsibility for 32 non-permanent markers, 16 laminated maps, 8 compasses, 2 GPS trackers, and a whiteboard. 2 days ago, he had allowed a soldier to take one of the GPS trackers away to practice with. The soldier had immediately lost it. Ryan was in serious trouble. Ryan was in the British Army and didn't know why. He was a serious-minded and conscientious young man who had once been a serious-minded and conscientious little boy, the type who always made his bed and dressed himself from an early age. When he displayed a need for spectacles, his parents had nodded as if it confirmed everything they already knew. And with that, they'd agreed his personality before he'd realised it was up for debate. They bought him Duplo, Lego, Meccano. They bought him an abacus and a Rubik's Cube and a telescope. They dressed him as if he was a miniature university professor, in little pairs of corduroy trousers and jumpers. They told everyone that he would surely grow up to be a physicist or a mathematician. Ryan's parents were normal, kind people. They weren't academic, they weren't the type to hothouse their child, and they were right. But then, anyone who's had parents knows how annoying that is. Ryan did love maths and puzzles and Lego. He liked making his bed perfectly, putting the stickers on his Airfix kit using a ruler. He was a dweeb. And he hadn't enjoyed the 2 football matches his dad had taken him to, although he thought he'd been careful not to show it. Ryan was a Ryan-shaped boy occupying a Ryan-shaped hole in the world with a loving family who understood and supported him. His teachers placed him in advanced classes and smiled the tired smiles of the rarely gratified. And then, when it was time, he'd passed all his exams with near-perfect scores and joined the British Army. To do a job for which the only academic criteria was a signature and the memorization of a 7-digit regimental number. Why? Because he'd wanted just once to surprise people, to shout into the void, to live. He regretted that every day. Once the lost GPS was discovered, Ryan would be shouted at, something he found a baffling waste of time and energy. He'd also found that, illogically, pointing out how pointless shouting was to people who are shouting at you only made them shout more at you. Then he would be charged, and since he was only a local Lance Corporal, he would lose his hard-earned and much-needed promotion. Hence, the devil. Or as he was known on camp, Staff Sergeant Harris. Staff Sergeant Bob Moses Harris ran Bravo Squadron stores, officially. Unofficially, he also ran the Barracks poker games and the bare-knuckle boxing and anything else that was not quite allowed or not at all allowed. You could buy cheat sheets for the annual tests from Moses, fake sick chits, or go to see him if the compulsory drug testing team arrived unexpectedly. He ran his stores like a cross between Argos and a local library. If a young soldier lost or damaged something, wanted to borrow a tent for a family wedding, or was happy to paint their daughter's bedroom camouflage green, then Moses could always help. In exchange for something in return. But once you owed Moses Harris, he would eventually call upon you to return the favor. And being in his debt was not a good plan. So it was an unspoken law on base that visiting Moses was to be used as a very, very last resort. Unfortunately for Ryan, he was desperate. At the furthest end of the camp, a long way from the normal bustle of regimental life, was an abandoned troop shelter. Teams of drivers and mechanics had once paraded there in the days of a larger field army. Inside a drafty bay was a nondescript blue door, and behind that, a staircase. It led to the underworld of military stores and the shadowy kingdom of Moses Harris. Ryan walked towards it like he was walking to his own execution. Standing outside the door was Beef, an enormous and rough-looking henchman of Moses who was making a pretty poor show of not looking like a bouncer. He scratched a pock-marked nose as Ryan approached, possibly a coded signal. Possibly he was just itchy. Down the concrete steps, and Ryan was now met by Wurs, a squat Gloucester man known for his limpet impression. When fights broke out on the base, Wurs was always there. He had an evil trick of clamping onto your eye socket with his mouth, sucking a black eye onto you like he was summoning it from hell. Wurs smirked extra knowingly as he escorted Ryan down the corridor into a dingy underground office, unlit except by 4 high and filthy windows. Ryan squinted in the dimness.
"Hello, Taylor. I've been expecting you,"
said a gruff voice. Wurs gave him a guiding shove, and as his eyes adjusted, he saw Harris sat with his feet on the desk, blowing smoke rings towards a series of erotic African carvings on racks of military shelving opposite. The shelving encompassed 2 walls and were only half full of military kit. The rest was taxidermy, carvings, curios, and paperbacks. Several stuffed squirrels stared disconcertingly back at Ryan with their sightless glass eyes. On the coffee table were an ashtray, a large, tarnished silver teapot, a square lighter of the type that had been fashionable in the 70s, and an open carton of Lambert & Butler. For Moses, the smoking ban had always been optional. "Excuse the darkness, Ryan," said Moses, motioning an armchair. "I spends a half-hour in penumbral contemplation each morning. Focuses the mind." "Hello, staff." Ryan sank into the battered but hopelessly soft chair, a spring digging into his buttock. He tried to sit primly, but the chair wanted him to slouch, as it insisted on his knees greeting his ears. "I'm sorry to bother you." Moses blew another smoke ring, which perfectly encircled a gigantic wooden phallus opposite. No. No trouble, Ryan. I'm always pleased to see my lads." Wurs re-entered the room. It was necessary for him to enter sideways, since Wurs had spent his formative years stacking haystacks before finding his niche in the army as a stores goblin. The thing is," began Ryan hesitantly. "They tell me you're a mathematical genius, Taylor," said Harris lazily. He blew a wavering blue smoke ring that Ryan noticed had an initial radius of about 1.82 centimetres and therefore a likely circumference of 11.435 centimetres. Ryan shrugged awkwardly. Even if that was a numerically quantifiable term instead of a vague and subjective definition, he was certainly smart enough not to admit to it. "Who are they?" Murmured Moses, smoke drifting languidly from his nostrils. Ryan tried not to cough. He tried again. Here's the thing. You've lost a Magellan GPS 310 handheld tracking receiver. Yes, I heard. Very bad news for you, that. Especially with the orderly officer checks coming up. Yes, Staff. That's the sort of thing that could spell real trouble, losing a piece of kit like that. No paperwork. No tasking. No excuses, really. No, Staff. Probably lose your lovely local rank for that, I expect. A promising career cut off before it even began. Yes, Staff. My condolences, Ryan. My condolences. Now, is there something I can do for you? Ryan knew this was unfair. He shouldn't be down here. Most of Moses's clientele were the dregs of the camp, the shady, the greedy, the foolish. He was none of these. He'd known lending the GPS to private rooks was a risk. He'd been lulled by the seductive pseudoscience of cost-benefit analysis, the potential value of having a popular, quick-talking wide boy for a pal. It was alluring. Someone who was everything he wasn't. Unfortunately, it turned out his pal was more things he wasn't, like untrustworthy, unreliable. Brian took a deep breath and spoke the terrible words as quickly as he could before his nerve failed him. Staff Sergeant Harris, please can you help me? He opened his eyes. Moses Harris was grinning a skull-like grin. A terrible grin. A multitude of teeth glinted in the light of his own cigarette amidst the shadows. I'm glad you came to me with this, young Taylor. Very glad. Of course I can. Corporal Sedge, if you don't mind. Wurs placed a Magellan 310 GPS tracker on the table. Take this replacement with my compliments, said Moses generously. Ryan reached out his hand for it, awash with temporary relief. For a few seconds at least, his problems were over. Thank you very much. My pleasure, son. Oh, and don't worry about anyone noticing. The serial numbers match, and everything. With a terrible sinking feeling, Ryan saw that Moses was right. It wasn't just the same model as the one he had lost. It was the one he had lost. The hollow in his stomach became a chasm. And how should I repay you, Staff? Staff Sergeant Harris grinned like a skeleton and lit a new cigarette from the stub of the last. He stretched and yawned, his long legs encircling his office chair, like a sea serpent dragging a helpless ship beneath the waves. Stick the lights in the kettle on, Corporal Sedge, he said with relish. and bring me that box of stuff for HQ company? I feel altruistic this morning."
Moses returned his gaze to Lance Corporal Taylor.
"Don't worry for now, Ryan. I'll call you if I need a favour."
He waved at the room allocation chart on the wall. Staff Sergeant Harris also ran B Squadron accommodation, and under every little box diagram of a room was a spare key and a name.
"After all, I know where you sleep."
Warning order. Zanzibar Barracks will close on the 1st of April 2008. An implementation order will follow. Paragraph 1. Following a feasibility study, your camp has been scheduled for closure. Paragraph 2. It is understood that some minor upheaval to personnel with regard to homes, schools, partners, children, dependents, spousal careers, GP clinics, and the consequences of moving 500 personnel at short notice to an unspecified location may occur. Paragraph 3. All personnel will soon be given an opportunity to watch the Ministry of Defence MOD-approved instructional DVD, Service Fun, Service First, Fun Last, narrated by Bear Grylls. Paragraph 4. The MOD is committed to ensuring the Army is lean, robust and adaptable in the ever-changing mosaic of modern conflict. Your compliance in this matter is appreciated. Paragraph 5. If further clarification is required, please call the HQ Field Army Switchboard on 944537812. Press 1, then 2, then 5, then when prompted, request extension 564. You will then be able to raise an incident concern request with Capita, our nominated third-party civilian contractor. End of warning order.